So the U.S. Has now defied all moral superiority in the world, is basically showcasing itself as being no longer the moral compass. With the two different UN votes that just happened over the last few days, the two votes happened to stop the war in Gaza, to stop the bloodshed in Gaza. The UN Security Council vote that happened last Friday, and today the UN General Assembly held a vote as well. The U.S. vetoed the UN Security Council resolution that demanded an immediate ceasefire in the Gaza Strip. This happened last week. Here's the vote. Watch this.
I will now submit to the vote the draft resolution. Those in favor of the draft resolution in document S/2023/970, raise your hand.
En contra.
Against?
Abstenciones.
Abstentions?
El resultado de la votación.
The result of the vote is as follows: 13 votes in favor, 1 against, 1 abstention.
El proyecto de
The draft resolution has not been approved due to the veto of a permanent member of the Security Council.
So the permanent members of the Security Council are the United States, the UK, Russia, China, and France. And the rules are for the Security Council that if one of the permanent members vetoes a resolution or a measure, that it just doesn't go through. There are 13 members of the UN Security Council, but 5 of them are the permanent members, and it's those 5. The United States was the one country that voted against the resolution to end the bloodshed in Gaza. And interestingly, France voted to end it. China, Russia voted to end it. The UK, and there were other countries in the non-permanent members. You had Switzerland vote also to end it. Japan voted to end it. So you've got U.S. allies voting to stop the war in Gaza. The UK, with no guts whatsoever, clearly is not thinking everything's pretty bad. I mean, otherwise they would have also voted alongside the U.S. and vetoed the measure. But instead, the UK is like, okay, it's really bad. We know it's really bad what's going on there, but we can't upset our friends, the United States, too much, so we'll just abstain from this vote. So they were cowards, and they wouldn't vote along. They wouldn't take a stand either way. But actually, them abstaining said a lot, and that was that they clearly think it's really bad what's happening in Gaza, what Israel is doing. Otherwise, they would have voted to veto this, but they didn't want to upset their allies. And that was very clearly what they were stating. So you've got all of these major nations, including major allies to the United States, saying, yeah, what's going on there is really bad. We got to stop. We can't let Israel do this. We have to stop Israel from doing this. Today, the UN General Assembly held a vote. Now, this one's non-binding. It's not as it's not as strong, but it showcases where all the countries stand. And today it actually passed. The UN General Assembly voted overwhelmingly on Tuesday, today, to demand a humanitarian ceasefire in Gaza in a strong demonstration of global support for ending the Israel-Hamas war. I'm reading from AP News. It says the vote also showed the growing isolation of the United States and Israel. So the vote in the 193 member world body was 153 in favor, 10 against, 23 abstentions, and ambassadors and other diplomats burst into applause as the final numbers were displayed. The United States and Israel were joined in opposing the resolution by 8 countries. So you had, of course, the United States and Israel voted against the resolution to end the war in Gaza. The other countries who voted alongside the United States and Israel were Austria, Czechia, Guatemala, Liberia, Micronesia, Nauru, Papua New Guinea, and Paraguay. Previously, by the way, there was another resolution that was voted on back on October 27th that also called for a humanitarian truce, and those numbers were less. There was actually 120 to 14 with 45 abstentions. So you've got more countries over the weeks that have grown more disgusted with what Israel's doing, and they're now in favor of stopping the bloodshed. Quite a few more countries. But I do want to go through this list quickly of the countries who joined the United States and Israel, because you might be wondering, why did these countries abstain? Sorry, why did these were not the abstentations? Now, a country might abstain for a variety of reasons. One, because they agree, they don't like what's going on, they think things should end, they agree with the resolution, but they also don't want to upset their allies. So kind of like what the UK did with the UN security vote. They could abstain for other reasons. But let's look at those who voted against the resolution to end the bloodshed in Gaza. Let's go through this. So Chechnya, let's start with them. Czechia. In February of this year, so why would they vote alongside the United States? Well, because they got a boatload of cash from the United States in February of this year. They got $200 million were awarded to Czechia, were given to them to modernize its military. So it doesn't want to upset the United States right when it's about ready to be handed over a big check of $200 million. Guatemala. Guatemala and Paraguay, interestingly, have very close ties with Israel. Guatemala has very strong ties to Israel. If you remember, right after the United States announced that they'd be moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, Guatemala then announced that they too were going to be moving their embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Same with Honduras. So Guatemala has strong ties to Israel. Let me tell you why. Because in 1954, the U.S. backed a military coup in Guatemala that led to a 36-year-long civil war with over 200,000 dead and accusations of genocide. In 1982, General Jose Efren Rios Monet seized power with help from Israeli military advisors, so he was able to gain control of the government. Israel then became the largest supplier of weapons to Guatemala. They also trained them, gave them surveillance technology. During the Civil War, rifles were used. Israel's rifles were used for a massacre. Today, Israel remains the main supplier of military supplies to Guatemala and is heavily invested in the private security industry there. So they've got very strong ties. Guatemala's president, Jimmy Morales, who is an evangelical Christian. He's in support of Zionism and Israel. He's maintained close ties with the country. And so that is why they decided to move their embassy to Jerusalem. So they've got really strong ties. In fact, there was a lot of thinking that Guatemala was helped by Israel. So the United States had, because of the coup that the United States enacted on Guatemala, the United States then sanctioned Guatemala and so used Israel as a workaround of U.S. policy, a workaround to I guess, so that they wouldn't be embarrassed by their own policy. So they said, okay, well, we can't give Guatemala money. We can't back certain governments, but you can. So they kind of gave Israel the green light. But Israel and Guatemala have very strong ties. That's why Guatemala voted in favor of Israel. Paraguay, on Monday, actually, the head of state for Paraguay and also the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Israel, Eli Cohen, met up in Argentina on Monday, the day before this vote. And they agreed to open up mutual embassies. So they had embassies in the past, they'd closed them down, and they're now trying to rebuild ties. And so Paraguay didn't want to piss off Israel because the day before this vote, they actually agreed to open up embassies, and Paraguay is going to be opening up that embassy in Jerusalem. Liberia is obviously extremely connected to the United States, started by the United States. The United States is its largest donor. Micronesia and Nauru, Micronesia is an area that has a bunch of independent little states, except for some of them are not independent in Micronesia. That would be the North Mariana Islands, Guam and Wake Island, which are U.S. territories. So essentially they voted with the United States because they're U.S. territories. And Papua New Guinea is also going to be receiving a large check in the millions from the United States for funding. Austria, not sure exactly why Austria voted the way they voted, maybe because they don't want to be accused of genocide and Holocaust. Who knows what exactly Austria's reason for it was, but just giving you a breakdown of why these other countries voted the way they did, what their motivations would be, why they would vote alongside the United States and Israel. They are very much dependent on the countries, or they are the countries when you look at Micronesia, for example. So that's what the motivation was. Otherwise, minus them, the world overwhelmingly wants to see Israel stop this war. The world overwhelmingly is against Israel on this. The world is overwhelmingly looking at Israel in disgust, and they are losing the war. They're losing the narrative war. This is what Biden is trying to tell them. You guys are losing it. People are not respecting you. They're not going to like you after this. You are being accused of genocide and ethnic cleansing because you're doing that. And the world will look at you completely differently if you continue to do this. But I'll tell you how else the world is going to look at the world is going to look at the United States very poorly on this as well. But I have a theory that the U.S. is only voting alongside Israel because what else is the U.S. going to do if the U.S. votes against Israel and Israel does what Israel wants to do, which I believe Israel is going to do what it wants to do. Netanyahu's made it clear, don't care what the United States says. In the past, he says United States we can manipulate them. They're in our control. They're our puppet, not the other way around. And if the U.S. votes against Israel and Israel continues to do what Israel does, it showcases the fact that the U.S. has lost control of its little brother Israel in the Middle East. And that would be embarrassing. So I think that's why the U.S. at this point is going to continue to back Israel, because the U.S. knows if the U.S. doesn't back Israel and Israel continues to do what Israel's going to do, that it's just another sign the U.S. has lost complete power and U.S. hegemony and control is over. So I think we're just going to see continued support of an ethnic cleansing campaign, of a very shameful ethnic cleansing campaign going on against the Palestinian people.